DLA Piper is a very large global law firm. We have offices throughout the continent, and we've got a stand just outside the door there. Please do come and say hello. Whilst you're there, you can try out your putting skills. We've got actually a quite difficult hole with a putter. If we get enough holes in one over the course of the conference, we'll be donating money to I think it's a school in Kenya that would use it. So please do come and say hello. So with that introduction, I think what I'd like to do is I'll ask the first question, but I'll ask each panel member first, before answering the question, please to introduce yourselves. So my first question is, we heard actually from no less a person than Tony Blair himself just now about how important internet access is, and that without internet access and power, that you can't develop the tech sector. So my first question is, we've seen an awful lot of investment in digital infrastructure in Africa over the last few years. There's submarine cables, there's fibers, there's the low Earth orbit satellites, which of course will cover the whole globe, but many of the business case seems to be focused on Africa. So is that solution, is that problem solved, or what are the remaining barriers to improving connectivity and access to connectivity in Africa? So Charles.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charles Murito, and I lead government affairs and public policy for Google in Africa. And Mike, that's a fantastic question regarding, is the problem of access solved? At the moment, less than half of Africans actually have access to the internet. So the problem is definitely not solved, and there's still a lot of work that we need to do to be able to bridge that we call it the 50-50 moment. So we need to get there, the 50% of Africans to be online, and hopefully at least or at most within the next decade. As you heard on the previous session with the former Prime Minister Tony Blair, technology and access to the internet can really afford the economies to grow. We have a report that we released called the Digital Sprinters Report, and the essence of this report is looking at how does, by developing and breaking down certain barriers, really help accelerate the internet economy and more generally the economic growth of African countries that are starting to really take on the internet piece. And there's a couple of barriers that we are currently seeing. The first one is cost of capital. Capital needs to flow to the right investments, not just the undersea cable or the bigger investments, but also to the last mile. Almost about 70% of the African population, and Ben, perhaps you can correct me if I'm going a bit too high, is within about 25, 30 kilometers of internet access, either through dark fiber or other fiber backbone that has been built across the continent. What we need to do is also really figure out how do you connect that last mile, because it's really important. So capital is a big one. The second one is around policy, and that falls squarely in terms of the work that I'm doing with government. Really thinking through how do we get the right policies in place to really solve for both the taxation issues, infrastructure sharing, and also creating or putting infrastructure as critical infrastructure for countries, so that when there are fiber cuts or other malicious destruction of that infrastructure, you can be able to take the right course of action to prosecute those people. I'll pause there because I know that some of my other colleagues have good answers to this as well, so I don't want to hog all the air. But perhaps Koi to you.
Don't forget to introduce yourself first.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kinyanjui. I head the regulatory and public policy team at Safaricom. So Safaricom is, of course, a mobile operator operating here in Kenya and more recently in Ethiopia. So to answer the question, are we done yet with our access journey? I would say we are definitely not. Even in Kenya, which, as you heard from the former Prime Minister, is one of the more advanced markets in Africa, we still have a long way to go. We currently have about 7,000 towers as mobile operators jointly across Kenya, yet we have not covered over half the population. So we need just about double the towers to actually reach the rest of the customers. So it requires increased investments, not just in traditional infrastructure such as towers, but also in exciting new technologies like low orbiting satellites that will enable us to beam coverage into underserved or unreachable areas. Very much aligned to what Charles has mentioned in terms of what we need in terms of interventions. And I'll speak to the fact that, of course, policy is going to be a key enabler. I think I'm very encouraged at the fact that Kenya has actually adopted a pretty progressive policy landscape when it comes to technologies. We have in place a digital strategy that aims to guide us over the next 5 years. And one of the key components of that strategy is to think about how we're going to invest in infrastructure to ensure that more people get access to internet services. Another key component of this conversation, I think, Mike, is around one of the typical barriers that we see for our customers in particular is actually accessing the devices to get online. Devices too tend to be quite expensive. From Safaricom's perspective, we have just about half of our customers are able to access the internet using smartphones. However, there is a lot more to be done, and that's why we've partnered actually with Google to introduce subsidized low-cost smartphones that enable more of our customers to get online. So for as little as $5, they can place a deposit on a smartphone and then pay for it incrementally until they're done with the phone and are able to actually get online. So those are just some of the interventions I would say that are really needed in this space.
Koi, thank you for that. A few things you said interest me. Particularly interested in the last point about how you need a device. What it calls to mind to me was when I was a junior lawyer, there was a lot of excitement about the one laptop per child project that was intended to, it was before mobile phones became ubiquitous, and it was intended to bring laptops to every classroom throughout Africa, I think. Or maybe it wasn't quite as ambitious as that, but it was certainly that was the intention. And I expect you may know more about it than I do, but it didn't work. and what did happen was that mobile phones arrived, and the cost of those came down just through market pressures. So I'm just wondering if you think that will happen again. Do we need to subsidize handsets? Isn't the market going to sort it out?
It is definitely taking place, and especially for phones with the 3G range. Where we need more interventions is for 4G and 5G, which is where the industry is moving. So it's still very key to have the subsidized devices as they do enable access. Just to speak to the one laptop per child project, I think the key issue that we faced there was actually, or the government faced there, was actually access to energy. So it's great to give a person a laptop, but how are they going to power it up? How are they going to connect to the internet if they have no energy? And former Prime Minister Blair spoke about this quite comprehensively. The energy issue is going to be a key one in ensuring that we're able to deploy technology and internet throughout Africa. So key consideration.
Great. I think we might come back to regulation. I think that's another, as a lawyer, that's a topic that interests me. But I do want to go on to you, Sandi. First of all, don't forget to introduce yourself, but we're talking about the barriers to improving access, and I think you have a solution that can help, in particular with bandwidth sharing, that you might be able to talk to us about.
Yes, hello. So my name is Sandi Bitenc. I'm the CEO of 3R. We are building a blockchain-based platform for telecoms, and we are working together with K3 Telecom. And one thing for sure is bandwidth sharing models are starting to emerge. But right now I think I don't know any that's really sustainable at this moment in time. So how the bandwidth sharing models work right now is just, somebody is setting up a system for the end user to be able to share his own bandwidth. That's usually already a shared bandwidth, and then just allow everybody else to connect to it. And with it, there's a financial incentive going with it. But the problem is that here nobody is actually thinking about the ISP and the one that needs to provide the internet in the end. So this drives the internet usage to 100%, and being on a already shared connection, this doesn't work. So in that sense, such a model would need to incentivize actually all the key players that are in, and also the ISP provider itself, so the telecom itself, the access point operator, if we can call them that, so the ones that are actually then doing sharing of that bandwidth on site, but we do think that this can drive the prices for the end user a bit lower and make it more accessible. And with a smart setup and a mesh can be created, and it could actually mean a wireless connection for the end user. It depends. So we do think that with financially incentivizing bandwidth sharing, there can be a big network, a big mesh network that will work similarly to a, let's say, public Wi-Fi, where the end user can then connect to the internet. But as said, everybody actually needs to be incentivized here for this to work.
And Sandi, do you think that the traditional telecoms operators will welcome your solution, or do they see you as competition?
Well, I think that if they're incentivized enough, that for sure they might. But I don't think this is going to happen overnight, for sure not. And the model needs to be tested. And but no, there are already a few companies that are doing it. There are some that are doing it in the blockchain space currently, and they're expanding pretty fast. But the problem is that such models right now are actually damaging the telecoms, and they just won't work long term. That I'm pretty sure. So a lot needs to be changed there. But I do think that especially in the emerging markets, this type of providing connectivity can be I wouldn't say it's the last mile. It's probably the last 100 meters of sharing.
Thank you. So speaking of traditional networks, I'm happy to ask Ben, last but not least. Please introduce yourself, but tell us what you think the remaining barriers are, and also, do you welcome bandwidth sharing in the way that Sandi's just described?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, good to be here, thanks. So my name is Ben Roberts. I am Chief of Technology and Innovation at Liquid Intelligent Technologies Group. We have a big fiber network across Africa and data centers. And just in this sort of space of policy in Kenya, I'm chair of the ICT sector board for Kenya Private Sector Alliance. So this is kind of where my interest in policy intersects with technology. I mean, is the problem solved? It depends where you are, right? Africa is 54 countries or something, isn't it? It's 54, 53. Some are more further ahead than others. And certainly, South Africa and Kenya are further ahead of solving the problem than South Sudan or Chad. A lot further ahead, So we see as well, Nigeria as being this powerhouse of innovation. Perhaps Nigeria is slightly behind in solving the problem of connectivity, but they're way ahead of both those other two countries in terms of the innovation. So it's great to see so many Nigerian companies here on this event. But the remaining barriers, I think it's a universal theme, right? And for me, there is the aspect of policy and harmonization of policy, which makes things complicated, and that makes it more expensive. If you're a Pan-African network like us, doing things, yes, we've worked out how to enter new environments, what you need to do. We've got a formula of what we do and great legal teams to help you do this, but everywhere you've got a different hurdle to jump, and so that makes things much more difficult. But for me, capital is the big thing. Tony touched on this in his talk, and specifically affordable capital. If you are Liquid or Safaricom and we're building a huge network, we can borrow money at really great rates, right, from DFIs or raising bonds. We can get affordable capital to build out networks. But if you are an ISP in rural Kenya or in DRC or something, you're not going to get less than 20% interest. You can't get return on capital when you're investing capital into building networks on this type of thing. So I've done a lot of unpacking this in the recent couple of months, particularly with least developed countries. There was it's been postponed, but there was a least developed countries UN conference coming up, and this is kind of where we're sort of thinking this is the barrier, and the same back to what Kui was saying about what they're doing with the phones, paid little by little for the phones. It's the answer, right? I mean, growing up in the UK, you're about the same age as me, Mike. You'll remember our parents didn't buy a television, right? We used to rent televisions from radio rentals, and you'd pay little by little every week, and that's how we managed to afford a TV. So it's great to see it being available on the phones. We just need more devices into this, right? It needs to be, to fully participate in the digital economy, you are going to need, I've got more than one, I have a phone in my pocket, but I've got more than one device in my house, put it that way, right? I don't want to tell you exactly how many, I don't want anyone to come burgle me, but it's a lot, right? And it's from a laptop, a tablet, to a VR headset, to a PlayStation, to smart house, CCTV. These are there are so many gadgets, and if we can just extend financing towards more gadgets, affordable financing to citizens and to people building out networks, solving the last mile problem, that for me is the big piece.
Thank you. I think that leads quite nicely to, I said I wanted to return to regulation. I'm actually the editor of the Communications Law Handbook. It's not quite threatening 50 Shades of Grey in the Amazon bestsellers lists just at the moment, but I live in hope. I think last time I checked, I was at number 3 million, and I think that was after my mum bought another copy. But telecoms regulation, I think, and we've heard from a number of you guys on the panel about the importance of getting policy right. Having a sensible best practice regulation can, I think, and I wonder if you agree, can be fundamentally important towards solving all these other problems, including cost of capital. If you want to persuade a bank to lend money to an operator that's going to build a network, they have to be confident that the regulation is sensible and that the money's not going to, that the network's not going to be expropriated or something like that. So I think good regulation is, and the rule of law is fundamental. I would say that as a lawyer. In fact, I was telling some of you in advance of this, I give a talk to trainees at the firm every 6 months, and I decided about a year ago that I should retitle it Top 10 Worst Telecoms Regulatory Decisions Anywhere in the World. And because by contrast, bad regulation can lead to some really bad incentives and some really bad outcomes. African regulators feature quite heavily in my top 10, although not exclusively. So my question is, how important is telecoms regulation, and what can be done to improve it if it is important? I'll go back to you, Ben, so that you don't have to wait till everyone's gone again.
Look, I'm not a lawyer, but if you take a particular country and look at the whole depth of, if you take a ministry, a traditional ministry of technology from any country in Africa, and you take a look at what are the acts under that ministry, what are the agencies under that ministry, what is basically the history of telecoms regulations is that it was a set of rules designed to tightly control information. Back in the day when you'd have one international gateway into a country, and that would be the single source of information in and out of the country. So we're looking at a set of regulations that was put in place for a particular purpose. Depending on where you are, we've seen progressive reforms to that, and some are more reformed than others, but we still have the underlying basis of this is here to control information. So now obviously we're talking of data protection and all these things that are coming, which are more modern ways to think about information. It's more about protecting information, protecting citizens, rather than necessarily government controlling information and stopping citizens from communicating. So we've come a long way, and we've done a lot of work on ICT policies, and we've all been involved in this here in Kenya, and digital economy strategies. We in Kenya have come a huge long way. But other countries, not so much. And really, I think we have to go and rip up the book a bit and take out concepts that no longer exist. You know, an international gateway is a concept that existed 40 years ago when you had one satellite dish in the country. Why is it still in legislation? Take these things out and say, things are different now. This is not how it is. Do a full technology review. So, you know, we do need to, it's hard because some people who are an older generation in certain roles within government think this is how they're going to control information still. The cat's out of the bag, and we need to just see how to start again a bit.
Thanks. Sandy, do you have anything would you like to add on regulation? Oh, no. No, that's fine. Okay, fine. So Koi, obviously it's fundamental to Safaricom's business, so yeah, I wonder if you could expand a bit on that.
Yeah, so I think I'll start with a bit of context. So Safaricom is a telecommunications provider that also has quite a big play in the fintech space, that has aspirations to evolve into a platform for agriculture, for health, for education. What that all means is that we have about 90 laws and regulations that govern us at any one time, and that's only going to grow. So to Ben's point, I think the two key things for me in terms of regulation, I think regulation needs to be enabling and needs to be adaptive. Enabling in that it allows investors to explore new areas and move the flow of technology to grow industries pretty well, and adaptive in that it understands that technology changes on a day-to-day, if not second-to-second basis. And I think, as Ben has mentioned, we are doing a pretty good job here in Kenya. What we may need to do going forward is actually expand that scope and start to look at cross-border regulation policies that enable us to actually look at it from a, more of a continental or even a regional view, as opposed to a country-by-country basis. Because as we expand and as the technology grows, we need to take that wider lens view of how we're going to allow technology to thrive in the policy environment. So, yeah.
Thanks. Charles, you got anything to add?
Yes, the only thing I'd add is, as we're thinking about regulation, we need to think about the problem that we're trying to solve at the end of the day. That, to me, needs to always be the starting point of what we're doing. And that's not just when it comes to regulation, even when you're creating product, etc. You need to have a clear view of what is the end goal, why are you trying to create that regulation, that product, how does it help humanity? And for me, regulation at the core should be one that enables economic growth, protects human rights, and really, as Koi mentioned, is adaptive and can be able to be reformed relatively quickly. Because if we cannot be able to do that, then you get hamstrung in so many ways. And then last but not least, I do want to touch on the real life implications of those regulations. So I'll give you an example. It's not in Telecom, but at the risk of speaking out of turn, I think I'll use it. Here in Kenya a few years back, we transitioned most technical and vocational training colleges into universities. The impact of that over time has been that you have an influx of university graduates and no technical skills, right? So at the heart of the regulation in itself, the intent was good. However, the impact of it has actually been negative because we're now trying to scramble and find ways of resolving for that gap of technical training skills, or of technical skills in this country. So we need to look at regulation, whether it's telco and beyond, in terms of that view. What is the implication of it, and what is it meant to be solving for? Not just sort of from a short-term perspective, but the long-term implications as well.
Thanks. I realise it may not be the best hall for the purpose, but I wanted to see if there's anyone in the audience who's got any questions. That if so, you might have to stand up and wave so I can see you. There's two questions over here. I don't know if have we even got microphones? We do. There is. Yeah, hang on a sec. Whichever. Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Hi everyone. My name is Judith. with the Tony Blair Institute. So my question really is around regulations, as you said, but more so looking at infrastructure and connectivity infrastructure, and just a question around where do you see digital infrastructure sharing going in the region? Much as we are trying to improve connectivity, I think digital infrastructure is sharing within the region will make sense. And what do you think from the perspective of a telecom, but also from Google's perspective as well? Thank you.
So infrastructure sharing sounds like that's a question for you, Charles.
Infrastructure sharing is something that's very close to my heart, based on the fact that, as you may know, we at Google launched a project in 2013 called Project Link. The thesis behind that was that it's extremely expensive to build fiber infrastructure, any infrastructure, connectivity infrastructure across the continent. Ben mentioned the cost of capital, etc. So the thesis was, if you are able to build really high quality fiber, connect that in metro areas, how do you then get ISPs to all ride on that infrastructure and really then serve and focus on serving the end consumer? I think that there's still a very strong place for that, because at the end of the day, the pipes that have been laid across the continent are not fully utilized, right? So if you take the subsea cables, for instance, at the last check, when you take all the subsea cables that are operational right now, I was told that the actual consumption of it is about 45–46%, right? So there's still a lot of bandwidth available. The challenge is that we're not sharing that. So we do need to have the right laws in place that say, just like when it comes to towers, and Koi can speak more about this, although I think that Safaricom owns most of their towers, but you can see organizations, whether it's American Towers or Helios, etc., who have been building towers across the continent, and then different telcos can ride on those towers. And I think at the end of the day, that's what we need to ask ourselves, going back to, what problem are you trying to solve for? If we're trying to solve for connectivity, then let's take the most aggressive way to solve for that. Your business is not building towers, right? Your business is connecting one consumer to the next. So focus on that, focus on customer service, focus on the content that goes into once people are connected, what does that mean, and really solve for that, and then leave the people who actually build the infrastructure to do that. Project Link is now C-squared, brought in new investors as part of that, so you have the IFC, you have Convergence Partners, and Mitsui in addition to Google, and so that is continuing to grow, but we do need to have the right regulations that encourage that, so that it's actually more the norm rather than the odd liar out of that. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks. Does anyone else on the panel want to weigh in on infrastructure sharing?
I can just give some context, Judith. Thanks for the question. So infrastructure sharing is an interesting one, because I think the shapes of the businesses that traditionally held infrastructure, particularly in Kenya and across Africa actually, is changing. Like Charles has alluded to, towers used to be something that mobile operators would really hold close to their chest. They would, chest thump about it. We've got this many towers. Today, we're seeing a lot of players coming in, independent players, who their only expertise is just to build towers and roll them out. What that has meant for Safaricom is, how do we evolve and meet this new and changing environment? We have always shared from the beginning. In fact, our first tower was not our own. It was actually Telecom Kenya's, of course, because we wanted to build out the network. And today we share over 16 partners across the industry. So everybody from broadcasters to the other mobile operators. And it's very key, we believe, in ensuring the sustainability of the industry as we continue to grow and as we evolve. I'll just also mention the fact that partnerships is how I see the whole infrastructure space changing or evolving too. If you look at what's happening to submarine cables, about 10 years ago, a lot of them were government-led. A lot of them were driven by countries investing in what they thought was critical infrastructure for their countries. Today, it's about partnerships. So Google, Facebook are building really big pipes for Africa. And they're calling in the actual users and the operators to come in and invest in those cables. And through that partnership, we can actually expand and improve and just enable access to more and more people across the continent. So I think partnerships will be very key as we continue to look at that infrastructure sharing conversation.
question, and I see two more, but there's one gentleman close by to the microphone.
Understand. Hi, my name is Tony Ndongo from Tribe. So the national payments strategy has been put out by the Central Bank of Kenya this morning. You might have seen that. And one of the things that they mentioned was trying to create a more transparent and inclusive regulatory payments platform or solution, I would say. And my question then becomes to you both as Google, as Safaricom, as Liquid, and even just looking at the investor space, what opportunities and steps do you see yourselves taking to enable other probably more inclusive fintech platforms that are coming in, leveraging on what you already have? I give an example of Flutterwave. Flutterwave just raised $250 million on a $3 billion valuation, and their essentially sell to the market was other apps. Where are you in that space?
Ben, is that something that you could address?
Yeah, look, it's a very dynamic world, and I see that in, when it comes to the consumer side of payments, of in any country, you normally see it requires a lot of volume, right? So you do require a few number of players accessing many millions of customers, and we have obviously in Kenya we've got a very effective payment method which is used by many millions of people. I'm sure Kerry might mention it, but without infrastructure and data centers and platforms and devices, right? Then you're not going to get diversification. So while back to the gadgets, and I was saying about having many gadgets, while the mobile phone is the main gadget that most people have, everything is going to be based on the mobile phone. We have a company within our group that does point-of-sale terminals. So we do, in fact, for one of the major banks here, every time you use a point-of-sale terminal in a formal establishment, it's usually one of our terminals that we've sold to the bank. But we invested in very much the wrong technology at the time because, that required a merchant to buy a terminal that was pretty expensive, and we didn't have a financing option for it, right? So, where M-Pesa and Safaricom came in was it rode on a device that they didn't need to finance and pay and have people buy because they already had one for another purpose. There's a lot of room for more innovation, but ultimately, a few big companies are going to dominate the mobile phone, and that's going to be the mobile phone operators and a few of the large social media companies who've managed to get their apps very entrenched on mobile phones. So it's going to be very hard for anybody who doesn't have 20 million mobile phone subscribers or 1 billion social media users. It's going to be very hard for anybody to break onto that market in the consumer payment space.
Thanks. Sandi, your technology is all about inclusive or your solution is all about inclusive technology, as I understand it. That's a big part of the value. So I wonder if you wanted to add anything on this question about the importance of inclusive technology.
Yeah, so I would actually agree on this. Implementing different payment services, in the end, it'll come down to how many users you can address with it, and also, in the end, giving too many options to a client can also be a bit intimidating and so on. But I do believe that we are seeing a transition from the usual payment methods to, in my opinion, to the blockchain space. And of course, there right now, what's really, really important and the hardest part is actually to having a bridge between the traditional systems and the new systems. And that also comes down to a lot of regulation. So I think that The fintech companies that can actually solve this issue locally will be the ones that will probably get the most users in the future, and also the most integrations.
Thanks. And Koi, since the original question was focusing on mobile payments, I'd be remiss not to give you the opportunity to talk about it.
So I think we very much welcome what the CBK has been doing in terms of just refreshing the regulations around the whole digital payment space, and even looking at interesting concepts like digital currencies. I think they're really becoming cognizant of the fact that the market is moving and they need to evolve with the changes that are happening. And we welcome that. We hope to have an opportunity to lend our voice to those consultations. So Safaricom runs M-Pesa, which is a mobile money transfer service. It's evolved from a person-to-person transfer service into a whole ecosystem that allows people to do anything from paying for bills to getting insurance or savings on their phone. So it's a very relevant conversation to us. We see our future for M-Pesa actually coming through partnerships and through enabling people to access the platform and innovate on it or around it and create products that will then meet certain needs for our communities. So with that, we've actually opened up our APIs across to all developers. It's something that we look at quite closely and try and grow with them and evolve them so that we can jointly produce products that are relevant to our market.
Thanks. Charles, did you want to add something briefly? I'm trying to have time for one more question.
Yes, I'll make it quick. Moduloop, open source. At the end of the day, what we need to do is create an environment whereby any person who wants to create something can actually have a really solid platform or baseline that they can be able to build on. Moduloop Foundation has been working to do exactly that. And when you take Kenya, Nigeria, and a few other countries, they already have their real-time payments rails already built. But a country that is small, that is trying to build that real-time payments platform, is still struggling. So we need to be able to find ways of creating more accessible technology, especially when it comes to payments. And Moduloop is one of those platforms which is open source. Anyone can be able to build their stacks on top of that and really be able to take the advantage of that baseline that you really need to actually start transacting from a payments transaction. So Tony, to your question, I think for me, open sourcing the baseline is really critical so that more Africans can be able to access that. And then beyond that, then developers can be able to create interesting payment options on top of that.
Thanks. Now, I think we might have, I hope we've got time for one more question. I noticed there was, there's two more hands now. There's a lady here in the second row.
Good afternoon there. My name is Kerry Michael from Y Translate. I've got specifically a question for you with the new market for Safaricom that you're entering. What's your vision for the digital infrastructure sharing and also M-Pesa operating in the Ethiopian market?
I guess Koi here.
Thanks. So we have a very grand vision for our newest operation in Ethiopia. We hope to be able to use mobile technologies to actually expand access to critical services. And key to that, of course, will be our network. As you may be aware, we are expected to build out our own towers. We will be expected to share with the current incumbent, Ethiotel. We anticipate that there will be a day sometime in the future when towercos will be able to come in to the market and make it a bit more vibrant. That's not quite happening yet. We have been informed that we will be getting a mobile money license sometime in the near future. So we're looking forward to actually combining the GSM plus the mobile money to actually produce services for Ethiopia.
And then we did have one more question that was just a few rows behind.
Hey everyone, MMR. I guess I wanted to ask, so what is the role of super decentralized models in terms of connectivity? So like through air or helium?
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you. Could you hold the mic?
Yeah. What is the role of super decentralized models? So I think like through air or helium in terms of providing connectivity to people. And is it interesting? Are you guys interested into that? When, why, where? Yeah, would just be curious to hear any thoughts.
Okay, so the role of decentralized models in connectivity, that seems one for you, Sandy.
Yeah.
Well, on one side, I need to say that I don't see decentralizing, internet anytime soon. There's just too much compliance that needs to be met, and the actual internet is still very much centralized, and just decentralizing it at the end user doesn't do much. That's one. And with the decentralized models, like you mentioned Helium, for instance, well, the problem is that Helium needs to get internet somewhere, right? So the users that are sharing their internet through Helium nodes, they need to get the internet from somewhere. And how they're doing it right now, it's kind of let's say illegal. And if this becomes really mainstream, everybody starts doing it, it'll just break down. The ISPs just won't allow it, and they'll either start shutting down those models, or the price of the internet subscriptions is just going to skyrocket, because you cannot expect to have the same price of the internet being already on a shared model when you're using 100% of your bandwidth. You're actually not really allowed to use 100% of your bandwidth. So this has a long way to go. But if the ISPs are incentivized enough, I think it has a place in providing broader connectivity. And well, we'll see how it works out in the future. I do think it has a place.
Thanks. I think we've got a couple more minutes. Now, there was a question from over here. On the other side of the room. So, yeah.
Hi, my name is Paulette, and I'm here from AVCA. I had a question about something that was raised earlier in the panel discussion, which was related to barriers and access. And it was mentioned by a few of the panelists that improving sort of access to devices is a way that we can encourage more people to, not even encourage, enable more people to be connected. And I was thinking about how that fits within wider agendas related to sustainability and to energy access, in particular because there's this whole net zero agenda that we have to think about as well. So as we're advocating for more people to have increased access to devices, how does that fit with sustainability and making sure that we are ethically and sustainably consuming energy?
Thank you. So sustainability, is that consistent with giving everyone more and more devices? Who would like to? Koi, so.
So I think we're alive to the fact that a lot of people in Africa will have their first internet experience via their mobile phone. So we don't have as much options in terms of what we can use to get people online. It has to be the device, which is why we're really working around how we can get it to be cheaper and more affordable and get it in more hands. When it comes to sustainability, I think I would look at it in a different perspective. Our networks obviously are going to be the biggest consumers of energy, and will of course contribute to our carbon footprint. So while we may be able to encourage our consumers to recycle phones and do things at a more individual level, we're also taking the responsibility to actually see how we can reduce our carbon footprint by investing in green energies and sustainable solutions, so that we can get our targets down, or rather, get our net zero target up.
Ben?
Yeah, look, just from a Kenyan perspective, we've got one of the highest rates of renewable energy in the world anyway, so in a lot of geothermal and wind and hydro. So if you're using a device in Kenya, you are already most likely using a lot of renewable energy for it. But there's there is a bigger question about e-waste, and this actually comes up, and Africa has to take this matter on and has to be part of this global conversation about e-waste, because a lot of devices and gadgets that are ending up in Africa are already somebody else's e-waste. So most computers in secondary schools in Kenya are 10-year-old recycled desktop computers, often with CRT monitors. I think we've just in the East African communities banned imports of CRTs, which obviously consume more power. But you know, with that in mind, you know, we don't want Africa to become a dumping ground for somebody. Where does it go? Where is the last port of call at this, what is already e-waste? Where is it going to go? So we just need to make sure that Africa gets involved in this conversation and doesn't leave anyone behind and does give the opportunity for circular economy, but also you know, doesn't get stuck with a bill from somebody else's e-waste that isn't being paid.
Thanks. Charles, do you want to add something?
The only thing I would add is building on the point in terms of legislation and really looking at it from a Pan-African perspective. We do have a fantastic opportunity with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. The digital protocol as well as the trade protocol are currently being discussed and being shaped. So both private sector and public sector needs to be really involved in those conversations so that we can be able to contribute to how those policies are written. And I just want to touch on the point that initially you had spoken about one laptop per student or one computer per student. It really touches on what Ben has just said, because at the end of the day, all of these devices have a short life cycle. They are the model of devices is planned obsolescence. So at the end of the day, we really need to find a way whereby we're creating a model that relies more on software dissemination and utility of that more than the actual handset or device itself. And the device just becomes a model that can be upgraded over time as opposed to renewing and buying new devices literally every year. And then lastly, it's really finding ways of utilizing just the way on plastic bottles you recycle them, etc. How can we create an entire business that is focused on recycling different components that go into building devices? Because that's really going to be an area that we must tackle beyond just the energy component and green energy, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'll just use my chair's prerogative to add a comment before we close. Seems to me, and I guess I would say this as a telecoms lawyer, that at the improving communications and improving people's access to communications is good for the environment, because as we've seen with the pandemic, communications technology can replace trips that would otherwise be much more carbon intensive. In many cases, not all. There's still a value in us meeting in the same room in Nairobi, but there's many. What we've learned is that decent communications technology and decent devices can be good for the environment in that way as well. So look, with that final thought, I would like to just thank the panel. Thank you very much for your time, your interesting contributions, and I'll invite the audience please to thank them in the usual way. Thank you very much.